We're going to go ahead and get started in about 1, maybe 2 minutes, just to give other folks a chance to join in. They're running a little bit behind. For those of you who are logging on right now, just a reminder that the meeting will be recorded.
Coming in here. Okay. I can move this.
And we'll go ahead and give it 1 more minute. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are just joining us, please be aware that the meeting is being recorded. I am Jennifer Bullock with BBR, part of the Lafayette Connector Partners, and I'm going to ask Tim Nickel with the Department of Transportation and Development to go ahead and get us started. So Tim.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. I'm glad everyone could make it today. This is our workshop number 4. We're going to be going over a few things. You're going to see somewhat of our latest modified alignment we have, and look at the throughway and some line work and modeling and stuff. You'll look at some bike and ped and street furnishings and streetscapes. And so I'm hoping to get some, we're hoping to get some input from you on this as we move forward with the CSS material and move this on in through to the rest of the EIS process. We've kind of run through and we discussed some things with the city and NPO and got some input from them as owners. And so we're hoping you'll like what you see, and we're open to comment, and we appreciate that. And so with that, we can move on. I don't know if Steve, you want to move forward with the next part?
Let me go ahead and just give a few technical notes before we have Steve present. So most of you have been involved in these workshops before. This is going to be very similar to the other ones in that we're going to be presenting information in this workshop, and we'll be having breakout meetings in the next. So be aware of that. We'd like to make sure that you enter your name and your affiliation where it says participant name, probably at the bottom of your screen. And if possible, we would love for you to use the video feature, just so we can put a name to a face. If you are joining us on both phone and computer, please be sure to mute the mic and the speaker on one of those. Otherwise, we'll have feedback, and that won't be pleasant. If you're joining by phone, either both by phone and computer or just by phone, I would ask that you text your name to 337-781-6470. That's my cell phone number, and that number is in the chat as well. And let me know your name, and I will change it manually in the list of participants. If you are a public participant that is not an LCAG member, you're welcome to listen, but you'll remain muted throughout the presentation, throughout the workshop. We'll be going through chunks of the presentation with various presenters. You'll be allowed to ask questions between sessions, but everyone will be muted during the presentations themselves, except for the presenters. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, we would ask that you put them in the chat. And when the time comes for Q&A, we will read them off in the order that they come in. You know, I know that you've got lots of questions, lots of comments, but we would like to stick as much as possible to the topic of the day, which is the Thruway itself. It's a long meeting. It's a 2-hour meeting. It's scheduled to end at 6, so we're going to keep the chat moving as much as possible. Again, as a reminder, the meeting is being recorded. We will have the recording on the website tomorrow. And as always, we'll be sending you an email to notify you when the meeting is on the website. So with that, I'll introduce Steve Wallace, and he can get us moving. Steve?
Okay. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Derek, I'm assuming you're going to show the PowerPoint slides. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Great. There we go. Well, as Derek pulls up the PowerPoint, we do have several things on the agenda today. And thanks again for all of y'all joining us. And a lot of good news to share, and a lot of input that we've gotten from you guys in the past that we'll be sharing as we move through the presentation, and some decisions that have been made by DOTD, as well as I want to look at the Thruway, both the kind of the line work of the aerial view geometry, and then also some of the traffic models that we've done and how we think it'll operate along the Thruway itself. Then we'll look at some sections of the streetscape and how that would look, along with bike and ped considerations, and then finally some street furnishings and that kind of thing as well. And then we'll wrap up and talk about next steps. So Derek, are we close, you think, to getting the PowerPoint up?
I was already sharing for a few minutes. Are y'all not seeing it?
No, not seeing it right now.
All I see is your desktop screen, Derek.
Yeah, Zooks.
I'll go ahead and share it. Derek and Steve, you just tell me when you want me to advance the slide.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, there we go, Derek. You're sharing now.
There it is.
Yeah, let's go back one slide. Oh, the other way. There you go. Talking about some of where are we in the flow of the project. And as you can see kind of on the left, the items that have been completed, we've made progress through several things, including most recently the 3 workshops that you guys participated in. And thanks very much for all your input. It was extremely valuable, helping to kind of refine those options and then helping DOTD make decisions as we move forward. We're looking ahead. This is workshop number 4, where we'll talk about Evangeline Thruway. That's the 3rd line from the bottom. And then we'll follow up with another workshop number 5 on urban design later in the year. And then some neighborhood meetings along with the public open house later this year as well. So be looking for that coming up. Want to go to the next slide and talk through some of the results of the first 3 workshops. DOTD has been able to make some decisions regarding the structures. And so, Derek, you want to go through the next slide of the pier shapes and the walls?
I sure will. I'll put my video on just for a moment to say hello, but my bandwidth could be questionable here in New Orleans as we're still rebounding. So I'm going to turn that off to minimize the draw on it all. But we're excited to share sort of the preliminary conclusion on structures and some of the new content. I think you're going to like what you see today. We've got some really good news for you. I'm going to start with some of the light things. So, we spent the first 3 LCAG sessions together talking about the structure, 11 neighborhood meetings about the structure, obviously some technical cost, constructability, timeline data, pulled it all together, met with DOTD leadership and Tim, facilitating conversations all the way up through the secretary's office. And this is sort of what we've arrived at. And this is This is a definition of what is going into the EIS. Not necessarily preferred in the end, but obviously that's where we'd like to know this is all headed in a very linear fashion, very big milestone. So with no further ado, let me remind you of a couple of the simpler decisions that were to be made that didn't really have more broad technical considerations. They were mostly just aesthetic considerations. We had folks look at these pier types and these wall types and other pier and wall types. You know, y'all saw many more options than some other folks did as we winnowed things down throughout the process. And I didn't queue up any drum rolls or anything, but the conclusion is the square with crown cap with the specific mention of this placard in the middle of it being something that's designed by locals and potentially separate sorts of imagery for different neighborhoods along the corridor. Obviously, exactly what's in here instead of the Pelicans does not have to be decided for us to get a record of decision. Then in regards to the wall structures, what we determined was that the natural texture was very well received, but not with rock. Many folks mentioning live oak patterns. And so this is a standard product of a tree. We would we work with providers to do some sort of a product that would use the live oak leaf pattern, a group of leaves potentially, and something like these crowns. And with, in some cases, imagery derived from local artists, again, when it makes more sense for there to be sort of a signature piece in a specific crossing, like next to the river or in some other location. Next piece I want to go to is the main bridge type, girder type. Lots of things went into this decision. There were aesthetic considerations. You can see the relatively clean lines of this segmental box. It also gives you a little bit more height in some ways. That's not all chopped up. You get a little bit more light penetration in the middle. But it has a cost premium. It is a high value decision. It is not the cheapest decision, but it has other benefits. The life cycle costs are really strong and the constructability is faster than hauling in 150-foot LG or LU sections. Well, that's what has been selected by the DOTD for this project is this segmental box, which is an innovation. It is somewhat new. You can see here that the way that light coming in on a tangent is going to penetrate further underneath, really clean lines underneath. And even though that 22 feet of clearance that was previously agreed to is here in the center, there's actually some sense that your ceiling is even higher than that. That's fabulous news. And that is something that the DOTD and FHWA will be working to build into the project without an ask for local cost sharing components to that. Very strong statement there, I think, by the DOTD. This next piece, I'll turn it back to Steve to cover.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Just to confirm, the height that's been decided on is 22 feet in the mainline area. And that'll be throughout the viaduct as well as any other overpasses that we have along the project. One other bit of good news, one of the workshops we talked about signature bridges, and there's 5 different options that are shown here, all the way from the pylon through the double arch bridge. And as DOTD kind of went through a decision-making process, the decision was made to fund the project with up to 1% of the total project value going toward a signature bridge. And so as we looked at conceptual costs for each one, you'll see those that are reflected up in the top right of every option. Option 1 and 2 are below that 1%. And then options 3, 4, and 5 are above the 1%. So essentially what DOTD is saying is they would fully fund options 1 and 2. And any options above that, 3, 4, or 5, the differential cost would have to come from other sources, local sources or wherever else. And so option 1 and 2 are viable. They, I think, would make a great statement in Lafayette. And the thought is that the signature bridge would be around the Jefferson crossing area. If you go to the next slide. And so this is the layout of the project itself. And then the middle, you can go to the next fly in, there you go. In the middle there around the Jefferson crossing would be this signature bridge. And either the pylon or the cable bridge could be fully funded by DOTD. In addition to that, we talked some about gateways at the south or the north end of the project, and DOTD has made the decision to incorporate gateway features into the project, both at the south end and the north end. Exact locations of those and exact aesthetics and what they would look like have not been determined yet. But the good news is that they can be incorporated into the project. So that frees up our team to begin to look at what could those gateway elements look like and begin to move forward with that. So you'll see it in the bottom of the notes. North and south gateways will be included with the project cost. The signature bridge in the Jefferson crossing area can be up to a 1% total cost of the project. If you assume a $1.2 billion cost, that's about $12 million toward that element. And so we're hoping that this hits you guys as good news. It's really the summary of a lot of input, a lot of effort from y'all. And so we're happy to kind of announce that to you today. And we can move on, I think, to the Thruway itself and entertain any questions you might have later on in the project. Or Jennifer, is any pressing comments from the chat that we need to address before we move on?
Well, Steve, since before we get to the Thruway itself, let's just go ahead and take a couple of quick questions related to this, just to make sure that we stay on target. We'll answer these questions quickly, and if we need follow-ups later, we can do that. But Samuel Oliver wants to know, was the choice of 22 feet, was that a DOTD decision? And if so, what was the reason?
Yeah, the genesis of that 22 feet actually came from the local stakeholders way back in the original SEI or EIS NROD that was given for the project. The thought was that higher vertical than normal was something that the locals really wanted. And so DOTD at that point was shooting for a 22-foot minimum vertical clearance. And so as we looked at the different options and all the different areas of the project, 22 feet seemed to work very well. 16.5 is the typical project clearance on a DOTD project. So it's several feet higher than that. And so 22 feet was kind of decided on because of the additional light that it will bring underneath and minimizing the cost if we were to have to go higher.
Okay, so Anita then followed up, to be sure, as an example, option 3 would require 0.3% additional funding source.
That's correct. That's right.
James Proctor inquires, what does that mean in total supplemental dollars?
Total supplemental dollars? Not sure if you could elaborate on or clarify that maybe?
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and unmute James so he can
Yeah,
clarify.
I think on that slide, it says right there, approximately $12 million based on a project cost of $1.2 billion.
Right.
Yeah, so you answered my question.
Okay, got it.
Great,
Good.
thanks. Matthew asks, how are the cost estimates compiled for the signature bridge decisions? Can we view dollar amounts?
Yeah, we've done enough of the conceptual type layout of the bridges, and our AECOM team partners are expert in doing this. And so they were able to use cost per square foot and those kinds of things to help estimate what the dollar amounts would be. And so, I mean, conceptual level cost, but we feel like it's close enough to give us that percentage value that we would know, are we above or below the 1%? And then how close are we is acceptable really for this kind of level of project detail. Does that help?
And we did cover that extensively. It might have been LCAG number 2. I'd have to double check, but lots of details about the differences among those options and the costs, I believe, were covered.
Yeah. Okay.
So Matthew is asking about, I've heard the line, local stakeholders gave input on the 22 feet. Is there documentation that we can see on that decision for 22 feet?
Yeah, in fact, you could go back to the original ROD for the project, and it documented the 22 feet that DOTD was willing to go up to. So
Great.
I think there's some verbiage in the documentation as well.
Okay. And then Anita clarifies, so other funding sources would need to find somewhere between 3.6 million to 9.6 million if we wanted an option 3, 4, or 5 bridge. Is that correct?
I'm assuming the math's correct, yeah, but it would be the 0.3% up to whatever the last one was. So,
Okay.
yeah.
We're going to follow up with the CSS questions about height later, but we're going to go ahead and move on to the next part of the presentation just to be cognizant of time.
Sounds good. Okay, the next section we wanted to get y'all's input on is the overview of the Thruway itself. We spent a lot of time with our DOTD partners looking at the Evangeline Thruway and what can be done according to DOTD policy and guidelines and warrants and those kinds of things. And at the end of 2017 going into 2018, we had refinement options. We had 4 different refinement options that we were looking at. And as we got into more detail of those 4 options, 2 of those were eliminated and 2 have survived to move forward. And we wanted to go through those with you today. The 2 that were eliminated are along the couplet, and because of operational concerns and congestion and traffic concerns, the new boulevard was preferred over the couplet. And so we'll have those 2 options that we'll go through in just a second. Joe Caines with our group will go over that with you. The southbound off-ramp that was near the railroad spur has been eliminated due to some operational concerns and concerns with the railroad spur traffic. And so the off-ramp, though, that's at the 2nd Street area is still there. It would give access to Evangeline and allow folks to disperse all along Evangeline, as well as give access to downtown. And Joe's going to go through that as well. So, Joe, I'll turn it over to you, and you can show the layouts.
Jennifer, do I have the permissions to share?
Yeah, Joe, you're a co-host. You should be good to go.
All right, good. Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're perfect.
All right, good. So I'll cover some of the major differences between probably what the last thing you saw in 2017/2018 until now and the changes that we've made. It's really kind of tweaks, not necessarily any wholesale major changes. But like Steve said, the interstate is still a 6-lane facility. However, there are some auxiliary lanes in each direction to get you to the on and off ramps, basically between Willow and Pinhook. We're gonna really only focus on Pinhook to Willow. The Coliseum and University areas are basically the same. They have not changed since we last discussed it. And just for the sake of time, we're gonna kind of condense the discussion to this area that's really in the more developed area of the project. So we'll kind of work our way from the bottom and go towards I-10. But the ramp that Steve talked about being eliminated is here in this area. If you can see my hand, we had an off ramp in the southbound direction that went down to this roundabout, and the railroad spur is right here. That has been eliminated. And with the 2 remaining options that we have, the only ramp that we have remaining will be access from southbound I-49 to the 2nd Street area. There are other ramps. We have ramp access here at Pinhook. This is a ramp that peels off of southbound I-49 and goes down to Pinhook. And then in the other direction, we have a ramp that goes back onto Pinhook. If you approach Pinhook from the south, you would have an off-ramp, an off-ramp here to Pinhook, and then an on-ramp back to southbound 49 in the other direction. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit and we'll kind of focus on the Pinhook area first and talk a little bit about just the area and the constraints that we had to deal with. So to get you oriented, what you see from a color scheme perspective is the green represents at-grade roadway, meaning that's roadway that's constructed on the ground today. The blue is kind of a transition from the at-grade roadway to your bridge structure. And then the red is your bridge structure itself. You'll see some other colors like the light pink line. I'll zoom in a little bit. I'm not going to zoom in and out a whole bunch, but the pink color represents control of access. And control of access is used on interstate facilities to make sure that operations in and around the interstate access is not significantly affected. Again, DOTD likes to have some control of how the interstate is affected, and the control of access would basically limit the access around what we would call interchange locations. The orange color you see represents pedestrian facilities or / bicycle facilities. It's kind of the complete streets component of the design. And then the red lines represent right-of-way. So the pink and the red lines would be your taking lines. And then everything else is as I described. You'll also see these blue arrows that indicate directions of traffic. So in the Pinhook area, Freetown, Puerto Rico is here in the top portion of the screen. And then on the east side, you have the Gethsemane Church. So we have a displaced left turn configuration here at the Pinhook intersection. As you know, today, you cannot take a left onto southbound Evangeline if you were headed westbound on Pinhook. So that is a innovative traffic solution that we have here in this area. Because of the control of access restrictions, it is going to have some impacts to the driveway access for Gethsemane Church on the north side of Pinhook, and on the south side, Judy Street will be affected. Both of those access points will be relocated to Goche Road. And that is how you will be able to get in and out of this area. So zooming out a little bit, on the west side of Pinhook, on the Freetown, Puerto Rico side, we are gonna basically construct all of our improvements within the existing right-of-way. However, there will be some control of access restrictions again because of the downstream impacts that we're trying to mitigate from the ramp that we have coming off of southbound 49. DOTD wants to make sure that there are no operational issues in this area. There will still be access provided to East Vermilion Street, but the driveway access for the Family Dollar store and the Gulf gas station that connects to Pinhook is going to be eliminated. And the thought there is that East Alley Street can still provide that access. It's just that you'd have to take a couple of extra right turns to get to those two developments. On the south side of Pinhook, you have the La Rosen School, and we are maintaining access to that in every point to the west of that location. On the east side, we are, again, this is a much larger footprint for Pinhook than what's out there today. And there's some right-of-way taking in this area, and I want to talk about some of the impacts, particularly starting with Pack and Paddle. The impacts are such that it looks like the remainder of that property would not be so that that business could stay where it is today. A similar impact for Snow Seafood. Again, this is all because of not only the traffic or the vehicular traffic, but the pedestrian traffic in the area that we need to make sure that we can accommodate. Moving to the core area, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit and talk about the two options that we have. So last we talked, like we said, we eliminated the couplet option, but we do have the boulevard option. And the boulevard option has basically been considered in this area to have two different types of intersection treatments. The first one is what I'll talk about, which is the signalized option. And then there's another one that represents a roundabout option that we'll talk about in a second. So the signal locations will be at 14th Street / Taft Street, 12th Street, Johnston / Louisiana, 6th Street, Jefferson, 3rd and 2nd. And those will be the signalized locations. They'll operate similar to how they do today. I think the only new signal is at the 6th Street intersection. There's currently no signal there today. Moving a little further north, again, talking about this, the 2nd Street off ramp, we'll have a ramp that comes from southbound 49, and you'll be able to either access the downtown area or get onto the local road grid and continue into the developed area of the core section. So that is your signalized option for the boulevard. But I do want to make mention that because we're making a boulevard section with a southbound and northbound direction, basically in the area where existing southbound Evangeline is today, the thought is that we would be able to upgrade the old northbound Evangeline section and turn that section back over to the city. So what you see down here in green is basically improvements to northbound Evangeline such that it could be turned over to the city in DOTD, or the city could possibly have control of the boulevard section itself. So I'm gonna stop there and flip to the other option in this core area that addresses the roundabouts. We'll zoom in a little bit and talk about the roundabouts. So the roundabouts are basically at the same locations where we had the signalized intersections proposed. Again, that's Taft Street, 12th Street, Johnston / Louisiana, 6th Street, Jefferson, and then 2nd Street. The only difference is there would not be a roundabout at 3rd Street. Here, there's a kind of a special roundabout configuration, and I'll go down here to explain it a little better. The southbound ramp would basically tie to a separate roundabout. And from this point, you would have the option to continue into the downtown area, or you could circulate around the roundabout and get to Evangeline. The other difference about this option is we're proposing to make 2nd Street a two-way street, and 3rd Street would be a one-way street as it is today. In the signalized option, it would still operate as a couplet. So also some of the other changes are we're gonna disconnect Simcoe. Today, Simcoe crosses Evangeline and you're able to continue on kind of as a bypass for the downtown area. We are realigning Simcoe to basically tie in the 2nd Street, and you'd be able to go through these roundabouts and use the network grid on the west side of the Evangeline corridor to continue to your desired destination. Moving north a little bit, this is very similar to what you've seen before. The only difference is, again, we've eliminated the southbound ramp to the roundabout in this location. But for Willow Street, the Willow Street interchange, the major difference is that because of control of access restrictions, we're providing an alternate access for the service road that runs kind of parallel to northbound Evangeline today. And the reason why we did that is because if we were to cut off the service road as it's configured today, a lot of these businesses would probably suffer, if not kind of go out of business, because of the fact that it's going to be so hard to get access to them. So what we've done is we've taken that service road and we've extended it around the McDonald's and down around the Popeyes to tie on the east end of Willow Street. Also on the west side of Willow, the frontage road connection is going to be eliminated, as well as access or direct access to Willow for the Philadelphia Christian Church. And the thought there is we would provide driveway access on the west side of that Philadelphia Church campus, as well as the other developments that are in this area. So the new city street connection between Willow and MLK would facilitate that access. So I'm gonna stop there and see if there's any questions. I'm a little bit over, but I wanted to see if there's any questions from the field. Jennifer?
And just to chime in real quick, notice a lot of information for you guys to try to assimilate. These layouts will be available for you guys to review after the meeting. We'll post them and send out a link to where you can get to those and be able to kind of review them at your leisure. So Jennifer, any questions that we need to try to address?
We do have a few, but in the interest of time, what I'd like to do is try to take as many of those as we can at the end of the presentations. Wanted to know about the raised portion, how wide the raised portion is going to be, a little bit about what's going to happen if Pack and Paddle is moved, and a couple of questions about pedestrian crossings. But we're going to do our best to get all of those questions answered at the end. And if not, we'll move any other questions to workshop 4B. And we'll try to get the presenters, to kind of move it ahead so we can leave time at the end. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll get Joey to present.
Yeah, that sounds good. But just keep in mind that there is some more discussion during this presentation about the typical section and what those street sections look like from a section standpoint. So it may help answer some of the questions you have. All right, Joey?
Yeah. So what we'll be doing is showing some of the models that we've developed for the traffic that we've done for these two alternatives, the roundabout alternative and the signal alternative. And let me pull those up real quick and share my screen. Okay. So just to give you all a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at, we've got the, it's kind of an overview fly-through model of the alternatives. And then we've got some more zoomed in ones that we can look at a little later. We're starting with the roundabout alternative. We're starting just south of Pinhook, so we're by the water treatment plant. And then coming up as we approach Pinhook, and there'll be some little street labels to help you remember where we are. These are an operational model. So these were the models that were done to select the actual lane configurations. They've been kind of prettied up a little bit for presentation purposes, but you might still see some stuff that looks a little weird because it is more of a decision-making model than one to show true operations. We're coming up on, this is Johnston Street. That label's a little small, but that's the roundabout at Johnston Street. And getting into the core area we have 6th Street. There's a pedestrian crossing there at a roundabout. And then as we move farther north to Jefferson, and then a little top of the screen, there's 2nd Street and 3rd Street with those ramps that Joseph was talking about a minute ago. One thing we've seen in these models was that the traffic volumes, and we talked about this a couple of years ago, but the traffic volumes on ground level of Evangeline are projected to be a good bit lower, even than they are in the existing year. The thought is that I-49 main line will pull a lot of that traffic off of ground level of Evangeline, which provides more opportunities for some complete streets options, as well as in the core area to take the laneage down from 3 lanes in each direction today to maybe 2 lanes in each direction in the future. I want to say that the future traffic on Evangeline is about 25% of what it is today in the build year. And then we finish that video off at Willow Street, and I'll pull up the other one that we have for the signal alternative. And it's going to be basically the same fly through. So when we start at Pinhook, Pinhook's going to look very much similar to it. And you'll see the way the signals operate in the core area. We've got the main line is shown as red, and the blue color is anytime we have an on and off ramp coming on. Now you can see we've got some crosswalks that are kind of sketched in with pedestrians walking around. And like I said, we'll have some zoomed in views in a little bit where we can see those pedestrian operations a little better. But just so that y'all know, we have pedestrians modeled at each of the intersections throughout the project area, outside of what we're showing today too at a university and along Willow. So that would get a true feel for what the impact on operations would be to have pedestrians and bikes included in the models. Now we're coming up again to 6th Street with that kind of downtown connection that we're trying to maintain. And then to the Jefferson 3rd Street, 2nd Street area. 2nd Street would have a split phase signal for the off ramp, so that the ramp and Evangeline would go at different times. And then coming up to Mud Street. As we keep moving, coming up to that railroad spur, right by the old Walmart and the new Donlin Street connections that we've added in. There's some frontage road changes up around here that I know Joe mentioned earlier. And then the model finishes up as we approach Willow Street, close to the north end of the project. That's what we've seen. These models are PM peak traffic. So there's a little bit of queuing congestion, but the geometry has been kind of sized to handle it where you don't get anything excessive. Were there any questions about these models before we move on?
We're gonna just keep rolling for right now.
Okay.
Joe,
Well, then I'll pass it back on. I think Derek might be next. Or are we going to keep rolling through models?
oh, I think you can keep rolling through the models. I'm sorry, I just meant we weren't gonna pause for the questions.
Gotcha. All right, then we can see some of those zoomed in views of a few different spots. So this is the model for the Pinhook intersection. It's the same in the roundabout alternative and the signal alternative. Either way, we have that displaced left turn intersection at Pinhook. And you can kind of see the way it's phased out so that you've got those left turns. If you're headed towards Evangeline, headed southbound or towards the interstate southbound, that left turn goes. And then you've got pedestrians, which are able to cross in between all the movements. It's very similar to installations that we've designed in other parts of the country. We've been able to incorporate pedestrians pretty well in a lot of these type of intersections. We've also got zoom ins for that downtown access ramp at 2nd Street and 3rd Street. So this is the roundabout option for that. We came in a slightly different view. So the northbound Evangeline is at the top of the screen, and then that ramp coming towards downtown is at the bottom of the screen. So you get a better view of the way that ramp ties into the roundabouts and how that operates. And these are quick little videos. So if we need to come back and look at any of them, pause them, we can definitely do that. And this is the same thing, but for the signal alternative. So the orientation is a little different. We've got north to the right because you can kind of see that ramp just on the edge of the screen coming in at 2nd Street. So the car just stops there just now. Wanted to get a good view of the way those signals work for 2nd, 3rd, and Jefferson, because a lot of times when you have closely spaced signals, you have to be real careful about the way they get timed and programmed. But again, with the lower traffic volumes in the area, it appears that you'll be able to run them without any serious issues. And the last view we have is a couple of looks at the 6th Street area. Let's see. Yeah, so this is 6th Street with the roundabout option. You'll see Jefferson Street on the right of the screen, and Johnston is just off the screen to the left. We'll start kind of high and then zoom down low to kind of see what the pedestrian experience would be crossing at this intersection into downtown. So at the roundabouts, cars are supposed to yield to pedestrians. The crosswalks are pushed back from the roundabout a little bit to remove the pedestrians from that yield point the cars are having at the roundabout itself. But it is a yielding pedestrian crossing. It's not protected with any type of signal or pedestrian signal heads. The thought being that the cars are moving slow enough that they'll be able to slow down and yield to the pedestrians as they cross the road. And kind of the same view, but for the signal alternative. And this is the last video that we have prepared for today. We'll start out kind of high. Jefferson Street's over there on the right. And then we'll come down. And for this one, the pedestrians would have a crossing phase at the intersection where they'd be able to cross. So these people will wait for a little while. And when it's their turn, they'll start walking across. Yep. And that's the video. So if we want to come back and look at these later, by all means, they'll be available. And they'll be available on the website also after the meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Joey. We're going to go ahead and move it to throughway sections of the streetscape, and I'll turn it over to Derek.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, then. Let's keep moving. We've lost a little time. I know there's a lot of content and lots of questions that you have. We'll try to preserve some time at the end. I'll do what I can to make up a little bit of time here by giving you some more description. So what Joey was showing you was really the output of an analytical model, an operational analytical model, whereas these were developed specifically to help communicate to you what we're trying to achieve. How did we get here? Well, by considering the following things based on y'all's input and other reasons, complete streets policies. I think you're going to like what you're seeing coming up. I know Josh Harouche was working hard at the DOTD to make sure that the spirit and intent of the complete streets policy was met. And obviously we're cognizant of the LCG and APC's positions on those things. Obviously, we wanted to make sure there wouldn't be long queues and long delays and that sort of thing. It's, a mobility project, right? Safety is embedded in that, maintenance costs and such. And we also tried to think about the context, the urban commercial development that y'all have envisioned along the corridor. And so responding to that, we've come up with these cross sections, which, I got to say are very context sensitive, urban, progressive products for us to have collectively arrived at here. And I think it's pretty strong. I'll walk you across sort of from the right side or the left side of the right side. Okay, so this is one option, option A. You've got some private development, in this case shown as a sort of a low rise mixed use sort of thing. A space that maybe the shop spills out into, maybe it's necessary for utilities across a side slope, et cetera. A robust commercial, urban, livable, walkable pedestrian realm. 12 feet. The DOTD is proposing a 12 feet pedestrian realm. Now, in some cases, it might be entirely sidewalked off. In some cases, there'd be variants. So maybe it's green infrastructure, maybe it's tree wells, you know, the little details of that sort are yet to be resolved, but we're going to be talking about that this session and next. Light fixtures, don't get hung up on that. We'll come back to you with light fixtures later. Typical gutter, a shoulder. This gets a little into the bike ped thing, which we're going to focus on today. This shoulder can accommodate a bike, but is not calling out and welcoming cyclists. And I'll explain that in a second. I realize that's gotten probably a couple of you excited, but I'll come back to that. 2 travel lanes in each direction, not 3, 2 11-footers to calm things, urban, you know, between that and the roundabouts and other features, calming things a bit to make a more livable environment. The large planted median, we'll talk about green infrastructure at a later date. You know, these are all just, you know, suggested elements at this point. Don't get too hung up on a tree or whether or not it's recessed or not, but we'll get to all those topics, right? We're leading the conversation a bit. So there's variance for the median as well. In some cases, we'll get the full median. In some cases, there'll be a left turn lane in there. In one case, we have a double left turn lane and a major movement off of the Thruway, Louisiana, if I recall. And so in that case, we would definitely work a pedestrian refuge and not expect someone to make it all the way across. So even with 2, we sized this to be able to accommodate at least a modest pedestrian refuge in the center. Repeats on this side, as you might guess, 2 11s, that shoulder space, right? A sidewalk again. So this concept, alternative A, option A, I should say, works because we are using this shoulder where cyclists want to access the Thruway, where their origin or destination is on that big boulevard, right? They could use it. It's there for them. But instead, doing this with what we now think of as the southbound, and then on the northbound, developing a really low stress, low speed, low volume bike boulevard, right? By putting bike lanes on both sides of this, still giving shoulders up here. But if you're not actually going to a place on the Thruway, and even if you are, I guess, we would encourage the cyclist to use the northbound in a much more low stress environment, cut over at 12th or whatever it is they need to, come half a block up and get to their destination, right? But essentially takes all that bike movement, moves it away from all the volume that we're having to manage on the Thruway and all the turning movements, driveway action, or whatever else is complicated in here, just giving them a lower stress environment, just 200 feet away, 240 feet away, right? That's option A. Option B is to just go ahead and essentially color thermoplast that bike lane and make it official on the boulevard itself. This essentially does welcome the cyclists, but it's still not a super low stress environment for neophytes, for people with their kids with them, for folks who might take the lane in a mobility device or something like that. However, it does fully accommodate and you know, same level of accommodation for pedestrians, still calming 11-footers in the travel lanes. So those are the simple flat 2D cross sections that give you the basics. I'm going to show you some other drawings that were developed by Josh and his team. Josh will join us here shortly. And these other drawings are 3D, and they give you more details, but some of those details aren't set in stone. We just couldn't finish the drawing without them, right? So even though, for example, we haven't chosen light fixtures, we knew we had to throw some light fixtures on here, right? And so, and kept the power poles in the air and things of that sort. So don't, you know, take too much into all those. We had to lead the conversation, but that's partly what we want to do with y'all. There are now things that we want to ask you about and get feedback on. I mean, it was largely engineering standards that led to decisions like, well, how many lanes do you need, right? It's not easily debatable in some cases, most cases. However, some of these other options in the pedestrian realm and in the median, there are certain limits and certain constraints that we have, but still there are options on the table. So this is depicting what you just saw at some semi-generic location adjacent to McCombie's A. You can see the elevated structure over here on the other side of Chestnut. This is one that's showing the shoulder being used by cyclists, but not all painted green. This is also showing a tree well with a tree grate, which is one approach in the pedestrian realm, especially if in an area that would have more commercial activity. This might be appropriate. And you can see some trees and a median with grass and such. Let me now go to an alternative to that, which is more robustly landscaped. Now, a lot of this is going to be a little bit local preference and local costs, right? In some cases, I think what we've seen is that the DOTD has really stepped forward and provided a phenomenal elevated design with the pylon gateways, a signature feature, 22-foot height, segmental box. All of those are sort of set, and that represents a significant investment from the state. But I might think that there won't be as much discretionary state spending with some of these other things that sometimes the FHWA will determine are not transportation specific elements. At any rate, this just depicts it with more robust landscaping in the median and with some GI cells, low impact development cells here for some bioinfiltration to help with stormwater management. There's an urban design beautification piece to this. Maybe these cells aren't so big, maybe they aren't so frequent. There's lots of room to play with that. We want to start that conversation today. That's why we're putting these in front of you. And we look forward to hearing back in a week where we're going to talk a lot less and you're going to get a lot less lecture, and then you get to tell us which of these you like. And then one more option, which is showing the green actually as the bike lane on the main thruway. You can also see some one way that you can do some crossings. Obviously, these come at additional costs to be able to do tinted concrete and patterns. It's not a huge cost, but there's a small cost. Maybe some of these are improvements that are just made at one or two significant nodes. Not sure how much we get throughout the corridor. I know there's not much use of green paint in the parish now, if any. So the thermoplast may or may not be exactly what you're after. And then this dashed feature in cautionary zones, may or may not be. We'll have plenty of time to talk about all of those details. And these are sort of the materials with which you can start thinking and mix and matching. So maybe you like the different median, but you like the tree wells and such, and we can mix and match with those. And Josh will help us more with that conversation here shortly when we introduce it. Then I want to show you one of the roundabout images. There's just some speculative features here. Obviously, there's going to be some sort of schematic use for under the structure, and development is going to go differently in places. We're not saying that we're making giant parks or anything of that sort with these green suggestions, but mostly just wanted to depict for you what the roundabout would be like, give you a sense of the scale of it. This is not maybe perfect. I think the pedestrian realm's a little bit wider along here, but essentially this is very, very close and derived from the CAD drawings, which you also saw being used in the traffic model. That was a lot of talk about the cross section as a whole, but the biggest toggling point on the cross sections was really the bike and ped features, and lots of crumpled paper on the drawing room floor, lots of different ideas for how we could do this and that. We're really excited with what we've gotten to. That's on the thruway itself. What we want to talk about now is sort of how the thruway connects to the rest of the network for cyclists. This is not so much, there'll be some talk about some multi-use paths in this section, but this is not so much about the pedestrian realm. Obviously, we know that is very important too. The best way to talk about the pedestrian realm is probably to get Joe back up with the line work, maybe next time if there's questions about the pedestrian realm, and just talk about the crossings and why they are where they are and how they work with the roundabouts and that sort of thing. This is more about bikes, this short segment, and I'll get into it here. So as we had for the cross section, there are certain, sort of basis of design, right? So what were we trying to achieve? Well, we wanted to be sort of consistent with the local plan. So if y'all said we've always envisioned a bike through this pathway, then we try to make sure that we can accommodate that. We tried to match facilities to the extent possible. So if you've already got a lane, we don't want to match that with something ill-fitting. We've talked with y'all quite a bit. We've gotten, some good input from the bike committee over the years. There's a lot of cross-section talk back in 2017 or so, which seems like an eon ago, but there were lots of sessions. We had a great big visual preference survey on this sort of thing and such. So lots of conversations over lots of years, but I realize this is sort of the unveil on a body of items that we expect to get some further conversations about. With that being said, a quick note on the legend: a lane is orange solid, a sharrow is this little blue dashed, and a dotted green is a multi-use path, and the gray ones represent most the existing network with which we're trying to be consistent. So zooming in and starting from the top, Willow Street, you've got a multi-use path on this side. North side comes up, stops at the interchange, picks up again here, and then right by that I think it's the Brown Route bus stop, it sort of shrinks up to more of a normal sidewalk, but we'll be continuing with some sort of extra wide pathway sort of thing through this Willow area, which would also enable pedestrian connections to whatever under elevated structure uses are programmed here. So essentially a multi-use path, which would also connect to a multi-use path, which we've heard about year after year, running through the elevated corridor, right? So we've had a lot of conversation about what is the program underneath there and what y'all want where, and is there a farmer's market? Is there a basketball court? Where do I do this? Where do I do that? Could we have some parking somewhere? The arrangement of those features is something we have not yet talked about. We're going to get back to you next time about some more of those features and keep the conversation going, but that conversation does not need to get resolved now, so long as we know that one of the things we would do is get a multi-use path that meanders underneath the structure throughout the corridor and helps to connect things, is part of the proposal. All right, moving down to Simcoe. As you saw, because of trying to get that downtown ramp to Second, we've had to force the closure of Simcoe. You get very low volume on the west side, which was part of the consideration in there. We tried to avoid it, couldn't seem to avoid it. Another plan had it being depressed, which was going to have other complicating issues associated with it. So y'all call for a sharrow in Simcoe, and if there's some little piece that needs to get a sharrow, we can do that. More importantly, the bike lanes, second and third. We know you've got a network here that you spent a lot of time thinking about on the second and third couplet, and the plan has those extended out. Second to get over to Simcoe, which could then continue on, third. And this would also, of course, stick together that proposed low stress bike corridor, bike boulevard on northbound with this essentially east-west corridor. Moving down a little bit, the plan called for that multi-use path. Here's the Elevated Expressway, essentially. And, maybe it meanders, maybe it's a little over one way or the other, but essentially it's just conceptual. Louisiana called for a multi-use path as well through this short segment, so you could at least connect between, one side of the Thruway and this side. There was also the call for the sharrow on Taft, and, we can do that. But we also want to talk with y'all and with the bike committee again about what exactly we really are trying to do there, because Taft has that multi-use path nicely offset from the roadway on the south side. I don't know, it looks like a 10 or 11 footer to me. It comes up to around here, so we don't want to add that if it's going to have big right-of-way impacts or such, but we can have further conversations about this one, of course. We are crossing over the Atacapacá-Ishak Trail here, and we'll make sure that trail is still connected. I'm quite quite confident that it's going to be a beautiful little crossing. There are some very low cost, really nice design features you can do as you come underneath something like that, in that sort of intimate environment. That could be really compelling. We're excited about that. One last map, you're seeing up here, this Surrey Sharrow. We can continue with that Sharrow, and or we can debate whether it ought to be a Sharrow, but what we were going by was largely the plans that have already been adopted, the 2040 MPO plan and the LCG work that has been done on a similar topic. But the conversation, you know, is not yet resolved. It'll be, it's this week and next. We know that a lot of recreational riders like to go out of the city to the south through Hugh Wallace, which is currently just a Sharrow environment. We're not touching a lot of Hugh Wallace, but we can make sure that that's continuous and maybe even better marked than has been done previously. And Khalees Saloom had shown a multi-use path. This one's problematic for us. We could do something, right? But we're talking about a multi-level arrangement here because the number of cars and such. It's going to be essentially an interchange. I think that there's some room for y'all to talk amongst yourselves and then for all of us to talk together about what this ought to be. Where are we taking the cyclists? What are we getting them to? Are we just getting them to Hugh Wallace? Do they need to get over further? And what's the right way to do that? More to come on that subject. I want to go on and talk about some street furnishings. And let me see if Josh has been able to join the call.
I am on the call, Derek.
All right, Josh. Well, Josh, you're new to the group a little bit. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and then tell me when the next slide is, please do so.
Sure, absolutely. My name's Josh Cheek. I'm a landscape architect with Stantec and helping the team out as best I can and trying to just move forward some designs related to the CSS. So you just want to go ahead to the next slide, Derek. That'd be great. So we just wanted to spend a little time just briefly kind of, you know, starting the conversation on site furniture and kind of our initial thoughts on it and just get everyone's thoughts and make sure that we're moving in the right direction. So as Derek has talked about before, you know, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is providing that pedestrian way and the furniture kind of fits. It relates, you know, to the character of what's there and what's to come as well. And that allows us to look at, you know, the identity of space and the identity of place. And if we wanted to start to use some of these street furnishings to start to think about that local expression and how we want things to start to relate to community or neighborhood. And then one of the things that we always take into account is, you know, operations and maintenance and making sure that we're not adding any unnecessary burdens or hardships and things that we're proposing. So next slide, please, Derek. So one of the first things that we did was start to look at, well, what's existing, what's out there. Can we start to get some cues of some things that are currently in the community? So just taking a look and looking at some of the existing bollards. There's some forms. There's not a really strict identity. It's kind of a collaboration and of all these different elements, and as they're coming together. There's a lot of expression of art elements in some of the site furnishings laid on top of pieces. There's a need for multi-purpose. In the center image, there's a pedestrian control device that's also being utilized for a bike rack. Looking at some of the light fixtures and really from a form standpoint, seeing if there's anything that we can glean off of some of these existing pieces, whether it be textures, whether it be colors, again, forms. Is there some things that we can really start to utilize to help inform kind of the direction of what we're moving towards? So the next slide, Derek, will kind of look at one of our initial thoughts. So thinking about the kit of parts and as it comes together. And this one looks at a more traditional forms, but adding this subtle curve to the elements. So it gives it a little bit of grace, a little bit of movement. It's not as static as it would be if it was just a square, rigid. The color is a little more muted. So it's not the green that you see It's not a black, which would absorb a lot of heat. It's just more of a neutral color that kind of blends into the surroundings. But again, it's just this real kind of subtle curve, these graceful lines that start to create a character for the space. In the next option, it looks at, can we really start to play off of some of the identity of the existing neighborhoods and bring those into something that really starts to key in to that. So taking a cue from, the image on the upper left is a bench that's in Paris, and it's a really simple kind of interpretation of a bench, no standard slats, but then this kind of articulated form that gets carried through. So can we use that kind of a cue? So in the center top, you see an element that has a little bit of form, a little bit more articulation. We can kind of use this and have a Lafayette kind of icon that's on the top that gets carried throughout the corridor, but maybe there's a neighborhood identity element that changes as you move through the corridor. So it's not static all the way. As you're moving through, there's an understanding and a recognition that you're moving through these different neighborhoods, and you're starting to reinforce some of that placemaking opportunity with the bench. And then can we take those forms and start to look at ways that we can, have a baller that kind of has that same kind of character. I don't think we found the right trash can yet to really to fit into this concept, but thinking about it, that it's a little more articulation, there's a little more design to it. And then the next slide takes that same concept but really starts to simplify it. So instead of that heavy articulation, it's a simple kind of rounded form. So more traditional in approach, but it's just that simple rounded form. We can still do some of the placemaking that we had in the other one. But this is just starts to tone back some of that and cleans it up and has a more kind of that simple geometry to the objects. And then the next slide kind of takes a different approach and thinks about it from, maybe we should, instead of thinking of it from that traditional standpoint, should it be kind of this warm and utilitarian approach to the benches and to the street furniture? So it has wood slats that are kind of, encourage a little bit more warmth. Maybe there's some corten steel that is brought into it, but it has a little more, character in sense of, as they start to go in along the site, they really create a unique identifiable element along that corridor that can get reinforced by some of the wayfinding that's being planned. And this just becomes this element that tries to unify it in kind of this really understated kind of utilitarian way. And I think that's really all the options that we had. And again, we're just trying to think through some of these basic ideas, and we'd love to get some feedback and, some things that are really kind of resonating, and some things that are maybe feel like they really aren't appropriate to move forward.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for that information on the street furnishings. At this point, I'm going to ask Steve to just give us a little bit of information about next steps and go from there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jennifer. I know we've dumped a lot of information on you over the last hour and 15 minutes. The plan is to have a second meeting of workshop 4 about a week from now, and next week, I think on Thursday, right? And
Carrington had my phone. What was your question?
The thought is that between now and then, we'll post all of the information that you've seen today, the PowerPoint, the layouts that show the geometry, the traffic models that show the movement of cars, et cetera. All the information that you've seen today should be available for you to review. And our hope is that you're able to get back with the constituents that are in the group that you represent and try to get even some feedback from them if at all possible. And then next time we'd be able to really dive into more of the detail questions and talking through that input with you guys after you've had a little more chance to dive into it and absorb it. So that'll be next week. Step after that will be another workshop, number 5, where we go through some of the lighting and some of the other urban design elements of the project. That'll be about a month or more away, something like that. And then we also want to get back with the stakeholder committees or the neighborhood groups, sorry, that are adjacent to the project as well. And then have a public meeting also before the end of the year. So generally next steps, that's kind of what's coming up. And so Jennifer, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Steve. We do have a little bit of time left for Q&A. Just for the sake of time, I'd like to focus on the last part about bike and ped and the other CSS elements, street furnishings, streetscape. And then in the next meeting, we'll be able to address, we do have all of the questions that people have asked thus far. So we will have an opportunity to, address some of those in in 4B. So I'll let folks ask questions, chat questions about what we've talked about, bike and pedestrian questions and streetscapes.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, are you going to read a couple of those questions off that we had?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go through the chat here about bike ped. Let's see, I'm looking at Sam's. What design practices are you incorporating to ensure pedestrian pathways feel safe to pedestrians, particularly from high-speed traffic? And then as a follow-up, just because it's related, Matthew asks, so pedestrians will have to cross potentially 8 lanes of traffic that doesn't stop to get from one corner to the catty corner side.
So,
Well, I'll start.
Jennifer,
Go ahead, Joe.
in regards to the part of the question that asks what practices and policies are we using, we are using DOTD's policies. They have guidance on roundabouts. Also, in regards to the speed of the road, we've heard in the past, and probably back in the 2017, 2018 timeframe, that the desire for Evangeline in this area was to slow the corridor down. And in discussing that with DOTD's stance on that was, and the best way to introduce what we would call traffic calming is to basically introduce a series of roundabouts, which is why that's one of the options that we have currently under consideration. Derek, you can probably elaborate on that a lot more. I just wanted to speak to the policy.
That's a good start. That is the start of it all. On the speeds, you've got 11-foot lanes instead of a 12 or a 13. The roundabouts in and of themselves, Joey could speak to it if we need that kind of detail, but the roundabouts will definitely slow the traffic, way below a 25 mile an hour limit, which is a key safety threshold for pedestrians, as you all know. And on the crossings issue, it's 2 lanes in each direction, except where there's left turn lanes, but there are left turn lanes in a variety of places. But that's partly why the center median and or pedestrian refuge is going to be built in there, so that it's only half the crossing at a time. Those are really about the only details we would get to at this level of design work. It's just a conceptual project at this point, so that we can complete the environmental analyses and determine right-of-way impacts, noise impacts, and things of that sort. As the project progresses, we would get into more details about exactly what curb radii would be used, whether there'd be an advanced pedestrian 3 seconds on the signals or some of those other features, but not at this level of design. That might have covered it.
Derek, maybe one other thing to add to that is there are no quote unquote left turn lanes in the roundabout option. The left turn lanes are really on the signalized option. That's what the roundabout facilitates, all movements.
That's right. That's at least a start, Jennifer. What else do we have?
Yes, okay. So Samuel does have a question about the ground level road. Will it remain a state highway?
That's something yet to be determined. I believe with input from the city and the MPO, it's possible for the city to take over Evangeline, but that decision has not been made yet. And I think it'll take some more discussions among the agencies to kind of determine what that would look like and what the desire of the city or the MPO may be.
All right, thanks for that one. Matthew asks, Taft has a lane, not a multi-use path. It currently crosses the throughway with no bike lane and sidewalks in terrible condition. It could be a really important connection for cyclists if improved. Need more than a sharrow.
All right, well, thank you for that. We'll take another look at Taft, and that'll be one of the things we can really roll up our sleeves and dig into next time. But thanks for the heads up. We'll do some looking into that before we get back together.
Thanks for that one, Derek. Matthew then follows up, is DOTD going to pay for street furnishings or will the city?
That would have to be an additional enhancement. Very likely, it would be probably the city or the MPO or some other entity.
Thank you, Tim. That will be something we can further explore when we're together next. You know, we've really just started this conversation about the furnishings. Obviously, the FHWA and DOTD have a very close relationship. And, you know, we've been able to see what the FHWA has been willing to determine had a transportation purpose in other recent projects. And so that really is the nexus. And so in some cases, it's really clear. So for instance, along a multi-use path, if y'all decide we need to have a small exercise station, that would be entirely a locally funded item. However, there are things that also serve transportation purposes, like lighting, that would be considered part of the project, but not all the lighting would necessarily be considered part of the project, mostly the safety stuff. So there's a little bit of gray area there. And then on both extremes, there's some things that are very clearly part of the project and clearly not part of the project. And as we, you know, we've just introduced the aesthetics of the design. So, and that includes with our great local partners who are now considering all these things themselves and thinking about all those matters. And so that'll be part of what we talk about more next week as well.
Thanks, Derek. Samuel wants to know, is there an intention for the project to include a design standard only for the benches, et cetera, or to actually install those things?
Sort of part of the last question. It's a matter of seeing where we are on budgets and things. You know, it'd be a few years off before we got to actually putting a bench or a trash can on the street. So we have some time to think about this. There's a couple of budget cycles between now and then. But that being said, a lot of it has to do with that transportation purpose. You know, and there's also some nodes where there might be higher activity levels that might get some of those appurtenances. And then, you know, so we are by no means proposing that whole suite of furnishings would exist on every block along the way. There'd be nodes, and exactly what number and which combinations of those is yet to be determined based on, you know, aesthetics feedback we get from y'all and neighbors and such, as well as that cost calculation of exactly who's paying for what and how much money do we really have.
Great.
There are also creative, you know, other ways that these have been done, sometimes with, you know, local improvement, business improvement districts. Sometimes these are after the fact kind of things, but there will be clarity throughout the next year about exactly what is and is not in the project as we define that. And that would speak to that question considerably.
That's great, Derek. Do we have any more questions pertaining to the context-sensitive solutions side of things from any of the participants? As a reminder, we're going to have the PowerPoint on the website for you tomorrow. And next Thursday, we're going to have the follow-up meeting where we're going to have more opportunity for interaction. We'll also be having breakout sessions. So we're actually a little bit ahead of time with that. Yay, when does that happen? And so I'm going to ask Tim to go ahead and wrap for us, if you would, Tim.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, again, when we meet up next time, if y'all want to have your input ready, and your thoughts gathered regarding these street furnishings and stuff, and the bike ped ideas y'all may have or input, that'd be good to have. With that, I'd like to thank y'all for being here and spending your time to look at this stuff and give us input, and just like to thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. We look forward to having all of you next Thursday, same time. And we will be providing you with the Zoom link a couple of days ahead of time as well. So we're grateful that you were able to join us tonight, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, y'all.